How do you craft a message before a spiritual group or congregation? What do you have to do to develop that message? Well, there are a lot of things that could be said, but I use an acronym, and it's an acronym for the word message itself. Let's look at a few things that are important. Message, M, you must motivate. You must go before people when you're developing that message in a way that motivates and inspires them to be uplifted, to change the way they think, to look at things from a different perspective. You see, we all receive information, but we process that information through different lenses. We process information differently. And when you challenge a mind or motivate a mind, think on a higher level, they totally calibrate their minds differently. If the church is hot, they say, isn't it good to be hot in this church rather than cold in my grave? If the church is poor, they say, let me tell you something. The disciples never, ever became millionaires, but they turned the world upside down. When you motivate people to see that they must think on a higher level from a spiritual perspective, then you have crafted a message that will change their life. E, a message must be essential. You've got to look around and see what things are pertinent and essential in the life of your listeners. And those are things that you must address. The reality is that one minister who had just finished seminary came into the pulpit after getting his degree in divinity, and he talked about all of the great philosophers. He talked about all the things that those philosophers expound upon. And one of the old mothers of the church, after she came up after his message, said, son, that was a mighty good message. You talked about Tillich and you talked about all of these philosophers, but do you know anything about what Paul said? You know anything about what Jesus said? You see, if the message is not essential, down to earth, where people can in bite-sized chunks ingest it and use it, it may be lofty and impressive, but it doesn't meet a central need. First, M, you must motivate. But E, the message must be essential. The third letter, S, is it soul satisfying? Does the message really touch a person in a way that comforts the soul? Sometimes when I listen to the sermons of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, I hear what he's saying. It's soul satisfying because he talks about, even in his last messages, about his own death. And he says, like anybody, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But then he begins to address, but mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. We as a people will get to the promised land. He beats the people into a frenzy because their souls begin to be inspired. When a person crafts a message that not only challenges the mind, not only touches the heart, but it satisfies the soul, that is a key to crafting a good spiritual message. What is the other S? The message can be effective, but remember to keep it short. There's the old KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. Well, we don't necessarily have to keep it simple, but we want to be mindful of our time. The average human mind can only take in so much information, and it begins then to wonder. A message that is short and to the point will have profound effect. A, always challenging. Always challenging the listener to know that as a result of hearing this message, how should your life be affected? How can it change? Always, always challenging the listener to take their life to a whole new level. G, is it good food for thought? Are there nuggets of wisdom that the audience will hear and take home and say many, many years from now? Oh, I tell you, I've heard so many messages, but those messages that were crafted in a powerful way are messages that I can remember even from my childhood, even to understand the thoughts and points long, long, long after I've been away. Is it good food for thought? Just like physical food is good nourishment for the body, a message that is crafted well in the spiritual context will be food that can be ingested and that an individual will remember all the days of their life. One of the things that I've always wrestled with, because I came up poor, was I wrestled with the reality that none of my parents had formal education. My mother had a 6th grade education, and my father was functionally illiterate. And I always wrestled with, in the school, in the business world, always wrestled with, am I good enough? Could I really do that? But guess what? I remember messages in the church, food for thought, about how David was a shepherd boy, by how he was the youngest of Jesse's sons, by how he didn't look like a king and nobody thought he would ever lead Israel. But David was a man after God's own heart. I remember messages about David going up against Goliath. Goliath was over 9 feet tall. He was looked upon